Hello everyone, my name is Ahmad Fazamirullah and I'm here to present my assignment for extensive reading and listening lessons. Have you ever thought of how and what it means to live without purpose? I haven't either. Until now, that is. And yeah, this assignment leads me into philosophy and I'm kind of grateful for it, I guess. Perhaps I will explore more about it by maybe reading more philosophy literature books and some podcast on philosophy. But for this video, I will give you a brief summary and the basic idea of what I've read and listened to for this assignment, and then give a review for the works I've consumed. First things first, I'd like to start with the reading assignments. For that, at first I picked Wuthering Heights by Emily Brons because it's one of the literature books that I'm familiar with. I know the book because it's the reference used in a game I really like called Limbus Company. The game pretty much got me into literature. The game is lore heavy and the story is dark and twisted. I really like the way they wrote the characters. They're pretty neat, I would say. The characters are also very accurate to each of their representative reference books. For example, how detached from the world Mayor is. He's the one from the book I'm reading for this assignment, and it's titled The Stranger. How big of a bird Heathcliff from Wuthering Heights is, and how Ishmael from Moby Dick is driven by her obsession, so on and so forth. Even though the character ratings are accurate, the story in its entirety is not the same thing to what it references itself to. So the story is worth playing even if you've already read the referenced books. If you're into literature or want to start reading one, or you just want to enjoy some good dark story, you should really give the game a try. Now, back to my reading assignment. Unfortunately, I found out that the book Wuthering Heights have like 400 or so pages, in which I really don't think I can manage because time is short and the clock is ticking. But not long after, another book comes to mind, and it's none other than The Stranger by Albert Camus, because it doesn't have as much pages, but despite the book only having 70-ish pages, the book itself is very heavy on the message it carries. Anyhow, I also stumbled upon this book because it's another reference used by Limbus Company, and I will probably read more books it has reference to. For example, the ones that I know are Divine Comedy, Metamorphosis, yeah, by Franz Kafka, Demian. There's also the Odyssey, and if I remember correctly, the book is like 2,700 years old or something, and I am not reading that one, fortunately. However, I did get the basic idea of what it is about. Moving on, back to The Stranger. I want to start talking about the writer Albert Camus. He's known for his philosophy called absurdism. What is it really? Let me explain. Some people think the meaning of life is found in religion, including me myself, or maybe moral beliefs, but as far as I understand, in absurdism, you just don't find meaning in life. Why, you might ask? Because there isn't one in the first place, and he thinks we should stop seeking for it, and accept this as what it is, that life is truly meaningless. This pretty much mirrors what The Stranger is about, a man that doesn't follow either religion or moral belief, and with that said, I will now talk about The Stranger. The novel starts off with the lines, "Mother died today," or maybe yesterday. I can't be sure. You might have heard this line before. The lines really shows how the person that said those words sounds detached from their own mother, and that would be right. He is detached even to the world itself. Norsault, our protagonist, is a representation of Albert Camus' philosophy that is absurdism, and this story follows Norsault, a man who doesn't comply with societal standards, that is considered by others as someone strange. Thus the title, The Stranger, I suppose. We see this from how he reacts to his mother's death. He didn't cry nor weep at her funeral, and instead he just had a coffee that has been offered to him and smoked at his mother's funeral. Besides her coffin, his absurdism can also be seen from when his co-worker asked him whether he loves her or not. He just replied with, "No, I don't think so," albeit him clearly showing that he doesn't love her. he agreed to marry her if that makes her happy, because it doesn't affect him that much. Later on into the novel, because of some absurd circumstances, Mersault shot a man at the beach that is swinging a sword at him under the blazing sun, not out of malice but almost as if driven by the moment's absurdity. Showing his complete indifference, afterward he gets into a court because of it, but he doesn't seem to be regretting his actions. But it is court in which, in Mersault's defense, it was a self-defense, but instead he is judged not because of his crime, but because he didn't weep at his mother's funeral, because he doesn't follow the societal norms, and then people started calling him a monster because of this. He is considered strange behavior by society. The court resulted in him getting executed by a guillotine, but he doesn't seem to care and is indifferent to it. Even after all of that, he didn't falsely embrace God when a priest tried to convince him to redeem himself and pray to God, and instead came to an understanding of all the kind of indifference the universe really is. The book teaches us about how societal norms ruthlessly decide right or wrong no matter the circumstances, and how Mersault is a representation of absurdist that's indifferent to the world as the world is to him. I really like the way Albert Camus wrote this book, that I might read his other works and probably do more reviews of his works, or just philosophy literature books in general for future assignments. If not, then for that, I'll just do it for the sake of it, which is unlikely, but who knows. As meaningless as my reviews are, I enjoy reviewing nonetheless. But I think my review doesn't do the book justice, and I don't put too much detail on the book itself. And I probably missed some stuff for all I know. Because of that, I want you to read the book in its entirety by yourself, and I'm just here because I wanted to share my opinion on it. I really recommend it for you to read it yourself if you're interested in philosophy, but that's not to say I'm an expert at philosophy whatsoever. In fact, I have just started learning about philosophy quite recently, and this specific Albert Camus work really gets me going. This is also my first time doing a video review, and I hope that it's at least enjoyable one way or another. I think that's about it for my reading assignments, and now I will move on to the listening assignment. Okay, so first of all, I don't usually listen to podcasts, and this is somewhat my first time trying to listen to one. The podcast I listen to is somewhat connected to the book The Stranger, which I've read and reviewed. The podcast I'm listening to is titled Within Reason by Alex O'Connor. As for the reason why I chose him is because the topics pique my interest, and I don't really have anyone to listen to for now anyway, because again, I don't usually listen to podcasts, so there's that. If you have any podcast recommendations that I should listen to, please let me know. Thanks. Now back to the podcast. For this podcast, he had a guest. Yeah, his name is Joe Foley. He's the man behind the YouTube channel I've been following. It's called Unsolicited Advice, which I've watched before, and I personally really like his content. And this podcast episode is titled An Introduction to Nihilism. Speaking of which, Joe Foley recently made a video about it too, and this podcast they talk about Joe Foley's content creation journey and how their and other people's perspective on YouTuber in general. This podcast also talks about a lot of philosophy, and of course, as the title suggests, a lot about nihilism. But what nihilism is in its abstract form is, and who can be considered as nihilist. They also talk about how philosophy is connected to politics, and how and why people started systemizing philosophy. Joe Foley specifically talked about Epic of Gilgamesh, in which he said Gilgamesh had an existential crisis after having death taking someone that is close to him, and he's thinking, what's the point in carrying on, because A, I've lost a loved one, B, that's gonna happen to me at some point, which shows how people could probably fall into nihilism and started to think that life's hold no meaning and we can't do anything about it. They also talked about Albert Camus and his philosophy that is absurdism, Joe Foley explained that nihilism sees life as meaningless and stopped there, but Albert Camus' absurdism pushes us to embrace that meaninglessness and live really, which really made me think about how we approach the meaningless life that we are living now, which also reminds me that in one of his videos he talked about how Albert Camus think we can potentially respond to life's meaninglessness, and those are by first suicide, which means a physical or mental escape, which I'm totally against. Secondly, a leap of faith, such as religious beliefs, but he also refers to this as philosophical suicide. And lastly, third, to accept and revolt against the absurd, in which one embraces life in the face of meaninglessness. There's still a lot more things they talked about in the podcast, in which I could include in this brief summary because this episode is like 1 hour long or so. The quality of the podcast is really amazing, and I would love it if you check them out yourself. Thanks for watching, I really appreciate it if you went this far just watching me rambling about my thoughts on things. So I think that's enough for now, and I'm hoping to see you all again. To close this video out, I just wanted to say, one must imagine Sisyphus happy.